Hey guys, welcome back. So now getting back into X-Men Dawn of X, there's quite a bit that we gotta get caught up with. But with doing that, there's some parts we're just gonna consolidate with certain topics, and there's others that I feel like need the extra attention, and with those portions we'll spend a lot more time with. So now before we get into it, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so real quick, one of the first things I want to get into is like this issue going on in the Savage Land. And even though this is one of those things that I feel like is super important, but at the same time, it's not something I felt like deserved an entire video. But I definitely feel like it's something worth mentioning because it leans into this possibility of humanity stealing or even copying one of the mutants' biggest advantages. And we'll get to what I mean by that shortly. But at this point in time, when the Savage Land had been intruded by these four masked individuals who had made their way here through a Krakoan door, which initially didn't seem harmless because Pixie and everyone else here, they were just thinking like, okay, well, somebody made it through the doorway because Krakoa would only allow mutants through, so there was this assumption that anyone passed through that door, they would have to be a mutant and most likely not hostile. But with this actually happening and these intruders making their way here and restraining Pixie and the others with non-lethal force, this presented a number of problems which were solved for the most part, but with doing so, the biggest threat was still left out there lingering. And so now your first issue is the fact that this particular area in the Savage Land is one of your Krakoan harvest centers, meaning that it's one of the locations where the mutants provide Krakoan plants, either for doorways or pharmaceuticals. And when this intrusion occurred, a quiet council meeting was immediately called in order because when this happened, a number of other things went out of whack with Krakoa, with the island shrinking 0.001% in addition to altering the amount of psychic energy that Krakoa would usually feed on, which is something we had quickly seen affect Jean, Emma, and Paris, which on the outside looked like a bit of a shorter temper or even headaches, but it was actually a side effect of them literally being drained by the island. But with the council sending Scott, Emma, and Sebastian Shaw to go and investigate and figure out what exactly had happened, this is where we get a bit of a hint of that severity that could potentially be something huge. Because even though when they arrived and they found that the threat was like this group of old ladies who go by the name of Horticulture, which is a name that Sebastian Shaw did have a little fun with, but here's the thing, not only did they make their way out without being apprehended by Cyclops and the others, which is pretty significant given that these are a bunch of old ladies with no powers but plenty of education on plants. But even with that, that's the most threatening part, because with these women being a combination of agrochemists, biotechnologists, and bioengineers who have collectively well over 2 centuries worth of practice, they've now become that next threat, and perhaps not even immediate, but with them still out there, they could very much become an issue later on down the line. Because as far as what we know at this point about Horticulture, which may be an organization with many more than just these 4 women, but with what we know about them and their plans to activate this horticultural seed, which will essentially determine what person lives and what person dies in order to send the world back to a state where it's predominantly plant life. And this is a plan that they came up with taking many dark practices which they believed the companies they had worked for before had used towards plants in order to make a profit, and they used those practices on the people who ran the company and really just turned the tables on the big greedy corporations. But with them taking this a step further and developing the group Horticulture, which prior to this point primarily had an extinction agenda, but after the predominant rise of Krakoa, they then believed that a different endgame was achievable, but only with Krakoa's help, which was why prior to them entering the Savage Land, they started with studying the different gates all around the world, but when the gates didn't provide them with enough information for their research, that's when they then came to the Savage Land and attacked the Krakoan Harvest Center, so they can get more information on Krakoa to use the island to their benefit, and even to the extent if the island doesn't cooperate willingly, then they'll know how to make it do so forcibly. And with making this visit to the Savage Land, they successfully got the samples that they needed, which now means any day Krakoa could become the next enemy. And not just that, but also any weapons that Forges use and infuse with Krakoan organics. Like, all of that is compromised now, which is just one problem of many bubbling in the background and is definitely not to be slept on. But from there, jumping over to Davos, Switzerland, to where we have members of the Quiet Council of Krakoa attending an annual World Economic Forum. And of course, the topic for this year is globalization of a new age, which is one of your early signs, like the dawn of Krakoa as a nation, like it has literally turned the heads of the entire world. And for that reason, this gathering with a number of representatives from a number of different countries, they call for representatives of Krakoa to attend this meeting and seemingly to gain more information about the nation of Krakoa and what these other countries believe to be the mutants' secret agenda, which for the most part really isn't a secret. But I also gotta say, like, when these guys touch down, to where this time with the Quiet Council Council, you have your Autumn group with Apocalypse, Xavier, and Magneto, who also have Cyclops and Gorgon for security, but with doing so, like, these guys are fresh, because they step out with the whole cinematic look like bum bum bum, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know the exact song, but it happens in the movies, like when people step out of helicopters and stuff. But with arriving here just before the Autumn members of the Quiet Council enter in, Cyclops and Gorgon are asked to stay outside, with the addition of Gorgon being asked to turn over his sword. And really, it's like this dude has no idea how dangerous Tomi Shishido is without it. And even furthermore, Apocalypse just walked in that room, so they good. And really, even if they weren't, with a number of Cerebros being set in different locations and provisions having been made to bring them back in whatever circumstance, it's like we know that's not the actual threat, even when it's hinted to be that type of instance. But even still, like, in the back of our minds, we have to remember that Charles Xavier has expressed a number of times that even though there's contingencies for resurrecting mutants, that even still that system is not perfect. And that's something we'll get much deeper into when we get back into X-Force. But at this point in time, when there's a strike team preparing a couple floors down, to where with doing so, they have these devices on their heads that are designed to block Charles' telepathy, and one of the guys kind of messes with it, like it's kind of irritating. But just in that moment with that guy barely touching the device, he gives up his location plus a portion of his team, which allows Charles to tell Cyclops and Gorgon where the two assault teams are, and also that the guarantee of safety within this meeting was nothing more than a setup. And immediately Charles just tells Cyclops and Gorgon just to handle it. But even still, with the Autumn members being aware of what's happening above and below the room, they continue to conduct business within this meeting. And really, from the moment that they step in there, there's no beating around the bush. And the question about their motives and their reasoning for establishing Krakoa as a nation, like, that's what a number of these guys lead with. But even with this, I like with Hodari from Wakanda, who's one of the few here who's really oblivious to what's truly going on as far as the assault teams and all that. But I really like how Hodari and Magneto, they have a bit of this exchange to where they share a couple laughs, and Eric is like, oh great, so that means that you'll change your mind about the trade restrictions between Krakoa and Wakanda. And Hodari's like, no. Like, what you thought this was, bruh? But when others propose the idea of, if the mutants are so free with this information, then why are they hiding? And Apocalypse was just like, does this feel like we're hiding? But while this is happening, directly below and directly above, Cyclops and Gorgon had split up so that they can neutralize both of these assault teams, or in other words, handle it like Charles said. And this is one of those things to where during the meeting, the same guy, he keeps looking at his watch, almost as if he's expecting someone, and he keeps going back from looking to his watch to going to his earpiece, and he's constantly doing so in a very suspicious way. But amongst this meeting, you have questions which are brought up by members like Ma Mingyao, who's your ambassador for China, who questions the frequency of the Krakoan prescription drugs, and really, like, with him questioning it, it's almost like him saying, do we need to buy this much from you? But even still, it's like Magneto assures him that the recommended doses are necessary for the drugs to run their course and eventually contribute their miraculous benefits. So it's not like it's a watered down situation that's only a cash grab, because for like what these drugs can do, humanity cannot replicate, and if they could, they would. But since they can't, and on top of that, even more important, the world knows about it, so for that reason these other countries can't just sweep it under the rug and just say, oh, we didn't know that there was a cure for this form of cancer. And that was a brilliant move which they don't really talk about right here, but it was one of those moves by Charles to where with making the world aware of it, it kind of forced the hand of the other countries to figure out a way to distribute it, with the exception of those like Wakanda who have their other means, or other nations with strict anti-mutant policies who at the end of the day just don't want it because it's coming from Krakoa. And when they're asked like, how do the other nations know that they're not a threat, Magneto just tells them the same as any other nation. Like, it's really no different, because just like any other nation in the world, every other nation in the world to some extent is just gonna have to take them at their word. But from here, where Magneto gets into what Krakoa will be doing differently, it comes about when Magneto gives a quote from Aldous Huxley, expressing the 3 pillars of Western philosophy, of which he's patronized for quoting a human and not a mutant, but he does rebuttal that there will be historical mutants to quote at some point in the future. But with continuing with this point, he goes on to tell them that humanity has their cycles, like the medieval socialites who got their lead from stealing technology from Roman ruins, but eventually that was lost in the Dark Ages, which wasn't even the first time that happened, because before that you even had the Bronze Age. But with expressing this cycle, this is where Magneto is trying to tell them that the mutants will be different, because as they proceed to excel, and they will, it's like here they're pretty much declaring that they're not going to have a Dark Age, or even a Bronze Age for that matter. And when one of them asks like, why should we even care about the Bronze Age? And Apocalypse replies, because he was alive then. And another guy's like, oh, if you was there, what ended it? And Apocalypse is just like, me. And I'm sorry, like if I was there, that'd have been the only thing I heard and I'd be like, wait, what? But this just proved Magneto's point so well, with the whole idea of humanity rising to power by shady means, then holding that power for a brief moment only for it to be taken by someone else. And hundreds of years later, whoever has the power then, they just make up the history that they want and they teach it to the next generation. And Magneto is telling them here that the mutants are going to do this different because they're going to do it better. And with Apocalypse sitting in the room, it doesn't even need to be said that they don't plan on facing a Dark Age or any Bronze Age because the person who ended their Bronze Age is sitting at the table. Like, what a statement. But what's also crazy, like on the lower level with Cyclops, who at this time is still linked with everyone through Charles Xavier, but when Cyclops gets in a pinch with two different guards to where he's tied up with one and the other guard is about to shoot him, from all the way upstairs, Magneto just tosses the guy's gun to the other side of the room, which is pretty crazy. But after this, Magneto continues to further explain to them, and once again keeping that transparency with telling them the plans of the nation of Krakoa, but at this point being way more thorough. Because with them assuming that this rise to power will have to be done by war, Magneto assures them that it doesn't, because with these miraculous drugs that they will buy that they can't produce themselves, that will prolong human life and also bring their governments money, which other governments will use for means of greed and lavishness. But as for the nation of Krakoa, they're going to reinvest that money. They're going to use it to buy banks, schools, media, politicians, because humanity has taught them that everything has a price tag on it. And for that reason, after they buy everything, they're gonna buy them. And once the nation of Krakoa has the power over the institutions, the economy, the media, and so on, they'll be in full control of who gets in. So in the case of those who hate mutant kind and wish them harm, their resources will be scarcely limited. And it's an amazing speech if I say so myself, because essentially Magneto's come to this meeting and declared world domination, but for the greater good of everyone on the planet. And I'm not sure if you guys caught it, but even in a way he kind of told on himself with the analogy of the medieval stealing technology to advance their society, because it was almost like dry snitching on the Marauders, but it flew over their heads. Like they had no inkling of what that truly translated to. But on the other levels, as far as Scott and Gorgon, Scott manages to take down all the soldiers with a number of concussive blasts, rendering them unconscious, when all the while Gorgon was upstairs going Salt Bay on people's limbs. But also with doing this, Gorgon leaves the commander alive, which may be something that comes back later on, but it's hard to tell because a lot of these dudes lost a lot of blood, so if any of them live long enough to get enhancements, then they deserve a cookie for doing that alone. But as the meeting downstairs wraps up, and the same dude I was telling you about who's checking his earpiece, checking his watch, like once the top and bottom floors are secure, Magneto just tells the dude like the guys you're waiting on, they're not coming. And essentially from here it goes over to Charles, who removes Cerebro, and he tells them that they've tried to kill him before. And the way that he says it, like he can't be killed not by the likes of them, it's a little condescending, but even still with doing so, not at all out of proportion, because he's essentially telling them that humanity does not have the means to quench their hatred for mutants just by murdering them, which I think is the most interesting thing about Hickman's decision for there being a way for mutants to come back from death. And even though this system isn't perfect, like we know there's a slim chance that someone can die indefinitely, which is something we haven't come to yet, but this is one of those things to where if humanity can't just kill mutants to get rid of them because they don't like them, then it challenges them to find another resolve. And I really feel like with that, this huge underlining of this new age of X-Men, it begs the question like, will humanity get better, or will they refuse to change and just continue to bang their head into the wall over and over again? But at this point in time, where the autumn portion of the Quiet Council begins to leave, Magneto essentially tells them like this is strike two. Like if they try this again, that they should expect a response. And this is pretty huge because we've seen the mutants turn their cheek twice as far as high-level assassination attempts, and for that reason, if the humans make another move, then retaliation from Krakoa is far beyond justified. But I also want to mention, because I know a lot of you are wondering, like with the thumbnail of this video talking about a plan that's almost perfect, well, that's the part I want to talk about real quick. Because with much of Krakoa's plans being centered around their production of pharmaceuticals, we still got to keep in mind the threat of horticulture and their mission to activate the horticulture seed, which was a mission that was recently updated, with horticulture also wanting to use Krakoa as an ally to their cause. And we got to keep in mind, like with this viable threat still out there, that if successful, they could bring the nation of Krakoa to its knees, in doing so by fulfilling their own extinction agenda, but in this case using Krakoan pharmaceuticals to choose who lives and dies. when the time comes and they activate the horticulture seed. And so now real quick, just want to give a shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And really, like with YouTube monetization being that thing to where a lot of creators got a gauge to where how much they can upload or when they can upload, but with you guys helping in the background, it really gives us the freedom to do more, and I appreciate you guys for that. And for anyone else who wants information on how to become a Patreon, I got a link down in the description to where you can head to patreon.com/DopeSpill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.